Alright, YouTube, there's been a lot on the news, particularly Fox News, of course, lately, about the so-called war on Christianity, particularly on Catholics, by President Obama, by, interchangeably liberals, Democrats, them fascists up there from them Yankee states and so forth. It's an interesting topic, though, that needs to be discussed, because when you really think about it, it's not really a war on Christianity or on Catholicism as the right-wing media wants to portray. Now, I speak as a libertarian, and it's sort of a split issue for me. On the one hand, I believe that people practicing a certain religion should be able to administer things in their own manner according to their own good faith and conscience. For instance, as a Satanist, I don't want a Christian telling me that if I were to work in the healthcare industry that I wasn't able to perform an abortion if I were, a doctor that performed abortions and so forth. So I can understand where they're coming from. But on the other hand, from a libertarian perspective as well, there's something else at play. What this essentially is an argument between rights of organizations and groups and rights of individuals. What it boils down to essentially is does the Catholic Church and or other Christian groups and the hospitals and schools and so forth which they administer through their own money, etc., do they have more rights or less rights than the individuals which make use of their services? Speaking from a libertarian perspective, I lean towards the side that the individuals have more power than the groups in this case. That is to say that, for instance, let's make an example out of it. Let's say there's a small community out in the Ozarks, and the only hospital there is run by Baptists, or run by, less likely, but let's just give it an example. Let's just stick with Catholics. The Catholic Church runs a small medical organization out in the middle of nowhere. There are no other hospitals in 100 miles. They have the only college, it's Catholic, and so forth and so forth. Do the individuals living in that community have the right to get what is considered safe, proper, up-to-date, modern medical care, such as abortions, administered contraception? Do they have the right to receive sterilizations from those organizations which do take public money? Or do those organizations, because they are run by a religious group, have the right to not give out such services because it's not in good faith in keeping with their religious group? I would say that the rights of the individuals in those communities would be disenfranchised heavily were these organizations to continue in that capacity, not administering this sort of medical care. For instance, basically what you're saying to individuals in sometimes remote, largely religious communities in rural areas particularly, that don't necessarily have access to a completely public, completely secularly run medical institute or college, what you're saying to these individuals is that it's up to them, because the organization doesn't like that sort of medical care, to go out of their way perhaps 100 miles to receive routine medical care that could be offered by that medical organization were it not run by religious freaks. I think the rights of the individuals in those communities trump the religious communities themselves, because in a lot of cases, think about it, in some remote community where, the first medical institute there was founded by nuns or something, that might legitimately be the only medical center within a great distance, perhaps a prohibitive distance for someone to go out of their way towards, to actually go to, especially since those communities, they tend to be more poor. The people don't necessarily have the time off from work to go out of their way to go to a secular institute for medicine or to a secular college and so forth. I would say that it is the responsibility of those who have taken the Hippocratic Oath to administer medicine to do no harm and to not disenfranchise these individuals on the basis of their religious beliefs. Now, until recently, there was the exception, of course, for religious organizations to not administer things like contraception or sterilizations or abortions and so forth. The problem with that being, as I pointed out, in some communities, that's the only medical care that's available. going beyond that, I don't understand why an organization should be able to limit care to people. If it's medically accepted, it's been shown it's safe, it's effective, it has a place in society, it's medically based. Things like contraception, although the evangelicals hate the idea of contraception, it's even used by most Christians. Most Christians use contraception. I don't see why an edifice like the Catholic Church, which at least in recent years has been more progressive than the Protestant groups in the country, would deny such care to individuals. I don't understand why it would be considered a sin. I don't understand why it would be considered reprehensible to their belief system. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, thou shalt not use contraception or thou shalt not get an abortion. In fact, the idea of abortion as being murder was originally put forth in the 1920s by medical doctors in liberal states. The reason they put forth the abortion as evil and tried to get evangelicals to prop them up on this was because they were tired of performing abortions so often. They didn't like having to perform abortions, so they're the ones that introduced it. In a way, medicine sort of screwed itself on the abortion issue. And there's another issue right now, of course, with the Komen Foundation, with Planned Parenthood. You see a lot of propaganda going around right now by they call them pro-life, but they're really anti-choice Christian groups, saying, well, 2 out of every 3 people that should exist isn't here, and, you've known friends who aren't alive because they were aborted, and it's so terrible and rips families apart, and this causes psychological scarring and all these terrible things. You've got to understand that in a developed nation, such practices should be used. If a person is not capable of caring for a child in a decent manner, they should not have a child. But that's not going to prevent them from having sex. Now, even if you give them contraception, there will still be cases where people are going to get pregnant. Now, the Komen Foundation withdrew funding for mammograms, breast tests for breast cancer, because Planned Parenthood provides abortions, and we don't want to be associated with them. Of course, they reinstituted the funding after they were pressured by Planned Parenthood, by pro-choice groups, by certain Democrats within the House and Senate, and they put the funding back. I would have no problem with them stipulating that their funding just be used for breast cancer screenings. That makes perfect sense. I mean, if they don't want to fund abortion, stipulate that the money only goes for breast cancer stuff. That makes perfect sense. But you've got to understand, these are valuable services. Would you rather have millions of people living in this country under the poverty line in families that can't really afford to take care of them or educate them properly, increasing the amount of money that the state has to pay to raise these children, since most of the families, let's face it, would be on welfare or unemployment and so forth? Would you rather bring those people into the world and give them that substandard living condition that would make their lives miserable? Of course, the Christians would argue, well, it's your responsibility to populate the earth, and you just shouldn't have sex if you're not married / can't afford the children. People are going to have sex. Let's face it, those of us who are progressive enough in mind to understand the human race knows sex makes the world go round. Sex is why every individual watching this video is here. Sex is why every individual on earth is here. Immaculate conception of Jesus Christ aside, sex brought everyone into the world. The idea that sex is somehow a bad thing, that it should be frowned upon, that it's sinful, all of these things, they don't seem to stop people from having sex. You can blast sex all day and teach abstinence-only sex ed, which, by the way, has been shown to actually increase the rate of premarital sex. Teaching contraception actually lowers it. There's no way to stop people from having sex. They're going to do it. And, I mean, even when states, they make laws against, children who are too young having sex with each other, there are people who are 12, 13-year-old having sex with other 12 and 13-year-olds. It happens all the time. If you want to lower the likelihood that people will have abortions, if Christians find abortions so reprehensible, sponsor more contraception and more sex education to teach people to use contraception. I think the reason why this is a problem still is that Christians in primarily religious communities that get abstinence-only sex ed and so forth, They honestly believe, because they haven't been educated properly about the issue, that somehow contraception rarely works, and it's going to send you to hell, and all of these horrible things about it, when actually those of us who grew up in progressive society, aka mostly the North, understand that it works quite well because we've tried it. It works well for us. I've used contraception before. It works. When you use it properly, at least, it works. If you're educated properly to use contraception and the manner in which to use it properly, it will generally work and you won't have to resort to an abortion. But if someone does have a problem, I believe they should have the right to abort. I don't see why this is a big issue anymore. This issue should have been laid to rest after Roe v. Wade. The evangelicals are frothing at the mouth right now trying to attack abortion and saying, well, we're pro-life. No, you're anti-choice. You believe, like Rick Santorum, your deity, that people should be forced to carry a baby if they're raped. That is to say that if I went out and raped 100 women and got them all pregnant, I kept them as slaves in my basement, purposely got them pregnant, and then let them go, that even I'd go off to prison, but they would have to carry the rapist babies that I put inside them. It must be wonderful to be a racist in a culture that doesn't allow abortion. You can have as many children as you want, because all you have to do is go abduct some woman, rape her a couple times, set her free, make sure she never sees your face, and lo and behold, you have thousands and thousands of children. Wouldn't this almost enforce the idea of rape? Wouldn't this almost perpetuate, and I know Christians believe that there are such things as rapist genes and so forth, which haven't been shown to actually exist, but Christians for some reason believe in them. Wouldn't you think this would increase criminality in the society by genetically perpetuating rape? It's sort of a strange thing that they wouldn't support the idea of abortion. But when you really look at it, there's no war on Christianity, there's no war on Catholicism, there's no war on pro-life. If you don't like the idea of abortion, don't get an abortion. If you don't like contraception, nobody in this country is going to force you to use contraception. If you don't like atheism, nobody's going to force you to be an atheist. But what the Christians are saying is they do have the right to force their religiously motivated views on others. That is the breach of our rights. There is no breach of rights stipulating that adequate medical care be given to the populace regardless of whether their local medical center is Catholic-run or secular. That is not a breach of the individuality of the Catholics, and it's not a breach of their rights. What is a breach of rights is when Christians get together and spend hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying and putting ads up to try to convince politicians that we shouldn't allow people the choice over their own bodies, that we shouldn't allow children to be educated properly in what 99% of us already use, which is contraception. And let's face it, even some of the most evangelist Christians on earth use contraception. They are being hypocrites and liars when they say, well, contraception doesn't work. Contraception education doesn't work. Abortion is terrible. You're going to hell. Sin, 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 sin. They're lying, and they're hypocrites. They're saying they're taking away our rights as Christians not to sterilize people, give abortions, and contraception. You're taking away the rights of individuals in small rural communities to have access to such things if they so choose to do so. And you're taking public taxpayer grants. You can't receive public money if you're not going to serve the public adequately. Strip the Catholic churches and charities and so forth of all of their public money, and you'll see them begging to give out abortions. Because most of them would stop existing. There'd be places in the country 100 miles from the nearest medical center as a result of this. Taxpayer money, which comes primarily from people who aren't bigoted douchebags and who aren't evangelicals, should not be used to enforce this anti-choice propaganda. If it's public money, it's coming partially from atheists, from Muslims, from Hindus, from agnostics, and from Christians who do believe in contraception and abortion. And here's the thing. 99% of them, if their daughter was raped, suddenly they'd be pro-choice. And that's the biggest hypocritical lie that they tell, that somehow, oh, it would never happen to us in our upstanding white Christian community. Rape never happens here. It only happens in the city and by liberals. It's bullshit. Peace out.